My integrity as a new Christian in federal prison got tested from the moment I walked into the door. Whenever you go into federal prison, they do this thing called intake, and it's where they take you in, they set you down, and ask you a bunch of questions. This was right at the end, actually, of the COVID um, protocol, where every prisoner had to isolate for at least 5 days. It was 10, and they had just recently changed it to 5 days if you had not been vaccinated. And one of the questions that they asked me when I got there was, had I been vaccinated? And the officer looked at me and he said, just tell them you have been, because they don't check anyway. But if you say that you haven't, you're going to be put into isolation in the SHU, which is the special housing unit, which is actually for punishment, and it's not a fun time. Um, if you've seen anything on the prison shows, the SHU, you don't want to go there. You're locked down 24 hours a day. You have a paper thin mattress. There's nothing to do. The lights are blindingly bright, and they don't shut them off. And so I knew that it was not a place I wanted to go, but my integrity was being checked right off the bat. God was saying, "Hey, how much do you trust me?" So I told him, "No, I haven't been vaccinated." And the guard looked at me disgusted, and he shook his head. And he said, well, after he finished all my paperwork, he said, "Well, come with me." And they sent me in the SHU and locked me down, and it was a miserable time. It was as bad as what I'd seen on the movies. It was actually worse. I hear these stories of these people that they send them there for months at a time, and they have so much mental toughness that they fight through it. They refuse to break. And I only spent 7 days in there, and it it was rough. I don't see how they do it, to be honest. I'm a lot tougher than what I was when I first went in, but man, those 7 days were awful. My hips were so sore I couldn't hardly move. I didn't get any sleep. I asked for a Bible for 3 straight days at every single meal. There was nothing to read. The book cart had just went through right before I got put in there. So, and I asked a lieutenant one time. I said, "Hey," because one of your rights is you have a Bible. I said, "Hey, can you get me a Bible?" And he said, "I'm a lieutenant. I don't get books." And I was brand new, and I didn't even know what. I said, "What does that even mean?" I didn't know that lieutenants were in charge, and that they were kind of like bosses. And he just looked at me blankly, and he walked off. And I didn't know nothing about counts. I'd read in the rules that you're supposed to stand or whatever, but here I am, and they come at the door and they start screaming at me, "Stand for count!" And I was like, What? And so I get up, and it's like, where am I going to go? I'm in an isolated cell. But so anyway, it turns out that that was my first test of faith. And so I said it was only 5 days. It was a 5 day protocol, but it just so happened that there was a holiday on that week. So they didn't actually come back until 2 days later. So I had to end up spending 7 days in the SHU instead of 5. And I've never been so thankful to be released as I was that day. Get into general population, they called it. Um, it turns out that that simple act of faith cost me more than just 7 days in the SHU. The judge had recommended that I take a drug abuse program in the federal penitentiary, and that would give me a year off of my sentence. And by going into the SHU, I missed out on getting into that class. That was I went in October 22nd. They were getting ready to start a class in November, and missing that class actually cost me anywhere between 2 and 6 months of serving time in prison, because when the next class, they did the classes every 3 months. When the next class rolled around, they actually shortened the amount of participants that could get in. So I couldn't get in that next class. And then after that, the program coordinator actually switched jobs and went to the VA and became because they were letting them do their visits from home. And so he started working from home, and they didn't even have an RDAP coordinator. And so they really just dropped the program down super low. And I didn't even end up getting into the program till a whole year later. So that one act of obedience cost me approximately at least 2 months and up to 6 months time, because the way they calculate it and the halfway house time where I could have went home and got to see my family and stuff. So deciding to tell the truth and stand on my morals cost me anywhere between 2 and 6 months time in prison. And I didn't understand it at the time. And I've learned that sometimes the truth and standing on your morals and your ethics is going to cost you something. But whenever I got out and then I got on supervised release, I got sentenced to 3 years of supervised release. And so after a year, you can actually petition the judge to let you off early. You tell them what you've done. If you've done it, I'd written 2 books and helped take care of my dad and got my old job back that I got fired from before I went in, to lose my job, to whenever I was, in active addiction. I got that job back at the coal mine. So I wrote him a letter, and I also included in there that I told the truth about the COVID vaccine, that would establish that what I was telling him was true, that I could have lied, that the officer actually told me to lie, and that I did not. I stuck to my guns because that's what I believed in, and that was how he could believe that what I was writing him was true. And that's how I opened off my letter. I think I'll probably include a copy here so y'all can see it, just for for proof. But it turns out that he ended up granting my request, and I got off of supervised release 2 years early. So it looked like it was only going to cost me 7 days, and it ended up costing me 2 to 6 months in federal prison. But in the end, I got let off of my supervised release 2 years early. So God knew what he was doing. So he blessed my obedience with granting me my freedom 2 years early.